If you want to sit down, it's okay, Bob.
Oh,
Our camera will
go ahead and we do full screen on the PowerPoint or?
We'll try to do that. Welcome, everyone, to the Contemporary Issues Sunday School class. We are pleased today to have Representative Bob Marshall here to talk about the legislature and election issues. So a little of both. Bob has served 1 year and had a very busy first year after being elected in 22, and he's running again. So our usual announcements before we start here. Zoomers, nice to have you with us. And we ask you to mute in the lower left corner of your screen when you're not speaking. And we are recording this for future playback on YouTube for those who are not able to be here. And since we are talking about politics again today, please be kind to our speaker and in your comments in general. This is not the forum to be blasting either political party or candidates. So we ask you to be considerate in your comments. If we have any first-time visitors, I'm Steve, the leader of the class, and we hope you'll come back, visit us in future Sundays. And other announcements. Yes, Frank in the back has.
Once again, if you want to be an election watcher, please see me after the class. I'm sure Bob will address that issue.
Election watcher. Yes, Betty.
The subject is Ghost Stories of Colorado.
Ghost Stories of Colorado. Okay. Very good. And we have a class Christmas party coming up December 12th. Put that on your calendar if you'd like to come with us and do Christmas trivia and dinner and that kind of thing. And Vicki, any?
And our recipe books we need to have the recipes,
Today.
yeah, today is the best. So if you don't have them today with you and you still would like to submit one, what we want is a memory and a recipe that kind of goes along with it. So if you could get that to Alice and I by today or at the latest tomorrow, that'll be great. Thank you.
Okay. Any other announcements? All right, I want to get right to it so we have time to talk to Bob. But let me introduce Bob. Bob Marshall narrowly won the 43rd House District seat of Highlands Ranch in 2022 by 405 votes in the heavily Republican district, where he flipped the seat to the Democrats, the first to do so since 1966. He served in the legislature last year and sat on the Finance and Judiciary committees, worked on bills about teachers' pay, veterans issues, crime, and others. Bob attended George Washington University, then served in the Marines for 6 years, went to Cornell Law School. He then worked as a clerk on the U.S. Supreme Court, the U.S. Court of Appeals. And he also, as a Marine, served in Iraq and Afghanistan. He was a Republican for over 30 years, but became a never Trumper in 2017. And then he joined the Democratic Party in 2021. Before his candidacy, Bob was active in local county politics. He sued the Douglas County School Board in 2022. Alleging that they violated the open meetings law before they terminated the superintendent at that time, if you may remember that. So Bob's been active in many ways. Okay, with that, please welcome Bob Marshall.
Thanks a lot, Steve. I might just correct two things.
Okay.
It was Georgetown, not George Washington. And
Oh, I'm sorry.
And alleged open meeting violations.
Yes.
No, we got a court judgment. It was open meeting violations.
Yeah.
There's no alleged. I know that's going back to your reporter days where
Yeah.
everything's alleged. We don't want to defame anyone.
It's not after the fact, that's true.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's a fact. It was open meeting violation. But I'm Bob Marshall. I'm the State House Representative for Highlands Ranch HD 43. It's basically all of Highlands Ranch, except they cut out the districts are 88,000 people. Highlands Ranch is about 107. So everything south of MacArthur Boulevard and Wildcat Reserve Parkway, backcountry and all that, they cut out and put in HD 39. But otherwise, the redistricting people did a really good job. I have almost a perfect rectangle, which runs from like Santa Fe to Lone Tree, which is basically Quebec, but a couple blocks east, county line, and then Wildcat Reserve Parkway, MacArthur Boulevard. I have my PowerPoint I just did for town hall I did yesterday. It took about 45 minutes, but I'll plow through quicker because we had an hour and a half yesterday. So 45 minutes on presentation, 45 minutes on questions. So I'll try and blast through this in about 30 minutes and just go over a few things. We'll have 30 minutes to talk. It does have on there the 15th town hall I've done. I put that on the first slide because I'm a little bit proud of the fact I've had 15 town halls since I got elected. Solo. That's more than anyone else in the state, and it's more than all the other legislators in Douglas County combined. The GOP had controlled the county forever, and they just never did them. And just the fact that I started doing them, a couple of my colleagues here, 3 of them I know had them, and I have no doubt it was people saying, well, Bob's doing these, why don't you? So a little competition's good because they have to keep up. So next slide. 3 takeaways. I always try and give at every brief 2 or 3 takeaways. You may hear a lot of things you like and listen and remember, but coming from my military background, it's like, what are the 3 things to really take away when you leave? Now, first is to find a bill. If you're interested in any bills, that's where you need to go. That's the website. That will take you exactly to find any bill that we're working on down there in the legislature and its status, its vote sheets, all the information about it. Number 2, if you're looking at a bill, read the fiscal note.
Yeah.
The bills are very complicated. They're legal language. Even well-trained attorneys get confused because it has to refer to other sections and, refer to CRS 123.B. And you're like, what the heck's this talking about? The fiscal notes in Colorado, we have the balanced budget amendment and we have the Tabor amendment. So every single bill has to have a fiscal note to say, what is this going to cost? And it's written by nonpartisan staff because it has to be accurate and it's in plain English. So even all the legislators, the first thing we do to find out what a bill is talking about, we'll read the fiscal note first. If you contact me, make sure you put up right up front, I'm from Highlands Ranch or I'm HD 43. I get thousands of emails from all across the state and even from outside the state. And the bulk of my late's time is sifting through all that, trying to find people that are actually constituents. Because I would like to help everyone in the world, but that's impossible. I'm the rep for HD 43, and I concentrate on that. So if you write me, put right up front, Highlands Ranch, then I know, oh, this is one we got to look at. And then 2 paragraphs usually max. If you get it 1's great, but some people send me 7 paragraphs thing. And as much as I'd like to read it, I wind up usually the first couple sentences and skim through in the last couple. So get your topic sentence and your just a few bits of information and then your conclusion and just get in front of me and, I read them. Next slide. That's my I love me. You can just pass. This is what I worked on last session. I've actually been there for 2 sessions, but this last session, I was actually pretty proud of the fact I'm putting it on a lot of my flyers and ads because I didn't figure this out until June. 7 of my 8 bills got out of their committees unanimously. All the Republicans, all the Democrats voted for them. And the 8th bill I got out with bipartisan support. It also had bipartisan opposition because it was a very touchy political bill. But I don't think any other legislator can possibly say that. So these first 5, every legislator is allowed to bring 5 bills by right, meaning you are able to do it. If you bring any more bills, you have to have special permission or it has to be some special thing. But every individual legislator, even if they're in the minority or whatever, is allowed to introduce 5 bills or concepts. And it must have a hearing. Colorado has a very well-functioning state legislature. And the reason why is kind of interesting because the longest serving legislator in Colorado history left the legislature in the early 90s and he'd been in there since the 60s. Oh. And as he left, he put on the ballot and did all these changes to basically get rid of all the dark arts stuff he'd been doing for 30 years himself. And he always knew it was wrong, but he was never going to give up that power himself. But as he left, he did the state a huge favor by you can't just put a bill, the speaker can't just throw a bill away. It has to have a public hearing, so, and there's other things that he did that just makes, if you're in the minority and you don't want to see anything get done, it may not be great, but Colorado, it doesn't get gummed up like it does at the federal level. If we want to get something done, something will get done. But I had the county commissioner elections bill that some of you may have heard about. The Purple Star School program, that was to help DOD kids. 40 other states had it. We didn't. We have a massive military population here. It made no sense. So I just ran it and got it done. Teacher tax credit. Some of you may have heard about that. I got that out unanimously from the Finance Committee. The Republicans had tried a version of it about 3 or 4 times. And to the senator's credit in Grand Junction, Senator Red, she's a Republican who'd been running it. She'd always included private schools, which also have to include religious schools under constitutional precedents right now. So she could never, our side, that's just a non-starter. So I was able to convince her to at least give up the private schools. So it'd be all public schools, which include charter schools and the 4 licensed teacher categories. And all the Republicans got on it. It was fantastic, but it died in appropriations because I don't think leadership wanted it to go farther. Because we got this problem down there too, where you know, there's people who think any gun law, you know, is not the first step to a totalitarian dictatorship. And every single tax credit or schooling or anything is not the first step to privatization of the whole system. But you know, unfortunately, we got advocates on both sides that think that way. The grant transparency, that was something that was interesting. It also died in appropriations, but I'm getting it out of this oversight committee, the tax oversight committee this session, which I'll talk about briefly as I get to that point. We do not have a centralized database website in Colorado for all the grants and all the tax credits you have to apply to the government for. And I'm like, this is so basic. And so as an example, my first session, we had a bill come forward to do a tax credit for seniors and disabled to modify their homes, so up to $2,500, you know, ramps and all that stuff. And they were reauthorizing it. It had been in place for 5 years. Everyone was patting themselves on the back. Oh, this is a great thing. And I'm looking at the numbers. I'm like, only 5 to 8 people a year are using this. Wow. It's obviously not working. And I told them, I'm not voting for something that's not working if you can't explain to me why it's not working. And they'd give me tap dances. Well, COVID. I'm like, well, COVID was 2 years. This has been going on for 5 years. Oh, we didn't advertise it enough. I'm like, well, okay, but then are you going to tell me what are you doing to make it improve? So yeah, I took some heat for voting against it, but I'm like, we vote on stuff down there a lot, pat ourselves on the back and look what we did. And it actually doesn't do anything. So I saw that, and then some colleagues, it was Rep Ortiz and another colleague, Rep Wiseman, brought a bill to the Finance Committee where we have a lower income and disabled utility grant program to pay the utilities for lower income seniors and lower income disabled people. Only 6% of the people who actually qualify for it were getting it because they had to apply through a grant program through like a nonprofit. So they were trying to turn it into a refundable tax credit. And their stats said if they did that, then about 65% of those who qualified would get it. But they were only going to do it for the disabled. And I said, why are you only doing it for the disabled and not the elderly too? They said, well, then it would cost too much because then more people would be getting it. And I'm like, they already qualified for this. So, you know, the rural schools brought this to me, and I'm like, people don't know what's out there. And that's, you know, to me, a fundamental part of government is let them know what's out there. So I put this together. We got it out of the State Affairs Committee, which some of you may know is called the Kill Committee, because they put the partisans on there. So if they need to kill something, the speaker says kill it, and you don't have to worry about their seat because they come from ultra blue seats. But got it out unanimously out of the State Affairs Committee. Even a Republican colleague looked at me and said, "We don't do this now?" And I said, "No." It's like, okay. It only had a $200,000 fiscal note to start it, and like $80,000 a year. But I think the concern was the fiscal note wasn't really just $200,000. It may have been in the tens of millions of dollars that people actually started knowing. But I'm running it again. Attorney General authority to operate DA offices. That was just a good government bill where we've had problems where DA offices become vacant. And it doesn't matter if you're conservative or liberal, when the whole criminal system grinds to a halt, it's not good. And we've had some counties or judicial districts where it's been like 7 or 8 months. So this allows the Attorney General to at least go in and operate it until the governor gets someone appointed in there. Issuance of treasurer's deeds. That is probably the most important bill that came out of last session no one knows about. So what happened is a year ago, the Supreme Court in the spring came down with a 9-0 decision for a case that came out of Minnesota. And what happened, it was a clear Fifth Amendment violation staking case. They had an older lady who went into assisted living and wasn't paying the taxes on her condominium. It built up penalties, fees. They foreclosed on it, tax foreclosure. They sold it at auction for like $35,000. And she owed like $15,000, and the state kept the extra 20. A clear Fifth Amendment violation. Like I said, 9-0 from the U.S. Supreme Court. And I read that case, you know, I was a lawyer and I saw it and I was like, man, Minnesota's very screwed up. Well, those in glass houses. Turns out Colorado was one of 12 states that it could happen here because of how we did it. So the treasurers, you know, we had the treasurers from across the state get together, and there was like 5 lead treasurers that basically rewrote the whole thing with our help and help of, you know, our other experts. The one thing I had a big role in though was I was at, the treasurers wanted to do the minimum they could get away with. And we made even, because it's just how it is. And if we didn't have the Supreme Court decision, I could have pointed out this problem and there would have been no way we'd ever have gotten it fixed. So again, they wanted to do the bare minimum they thought they could get away with, where they could still maybe take some people's money. And we're ripping the whole thing apart, starting from scratch and putting in a completely Fifth Amendment compliant system. And the people who did the lawsuit, the Pacific Legal Foundation, they're kind of a libertarian organization that nonprofit that does a lot of conservative and libertarian lawsuits. But they sent me an email that was very nice, saying the reforms you did were by far the best ones any state has done since we got the Supreme Court decision. Tax policy analysis, that was just a good government kind of thing. And then the senior housing tax credit, I think I just mentioned to you, or maybe I just mentioned it to you. We have the homestead exemption where if you lived in your home for 10 years, you're over 65, you get a break on your property taxes. But a lot of people rent their homes forever. They're elderly and they don't own their home, but they get no break. So we did this tax credit, and it also helps people who don't own their home for 10 years. It has a sunset. We're going to have the fight again. But I was proud. I got that thing out of the finance committee unanimously, and only 2 Republicans voted against it, because one of the big things was the money has to come out of the TABOR refund, but the homestead exemption comes out of the TABOR refund. And I was able to explain that to the Republicans because they were adamant that can't touch TABOR refund. I'm like, well, this is a fairness thing. These people should be getting it too. So we were able to get that out, and so that was a big thing. And we also got portability passed this time for the homestead exemption. Next. But that wasn't I wanted to run it, but they took it away and gave it to somebody more senior. These are 2 resolutions I ran, and we don't have time to do the 9 news article we did on it. But we've had a problem, and there's people in the party who don't think it's a problem, but it's a problem. 30% of the legislators down there got their seats originally by a vacancy appointment. They weren't actually elected. And both parties have gotten very adept with the term limits, where people come up in their term limited year, and then they give up their seat and the party appoints who they want in there. And now they're the incumbent in the primary. No one will run against them. Most of the districts are very blue or very red, so they're automatically winning the general election. So it basically becomes a self-perpetuating cycle where you have a small little group of people who get to decide who represents everyone. So Perry Will, who's a state senator on the Western Slope, great guy. He got his seat, I think it was 6-5. 6 people voted for him to represent 124,000 people. And we had a couple more where they were like 13 to 11. So 13 people decided. And again, it becomes self-perpetuating. These people almost never lose election. I was a rare bird because only twice that we could find in research has one of these appointees been defeated in the next general election. And I was one of the only 2. So I put forward a bill to try and, fix the issue. I got it out of the State Affairs Committee 6-5. It was very politically sensitive, but it was a constitutional amendment. So I'd need 2/3 vote, and I knew there was no way I was going to get it. So I agreed with leadership not to waste, 2 hours on the floor fighting it when they had other stuff to do, when it wasn't going to go anywhere. But it made a point, because sometimes you can do these things, and it got so much press and people looking at the thing. They haven't had one single vacancy appointment by people giving up their seat this year. And in fact, I probably shouldn't talk out of school, but Rep. Ortiz was planning on giving up his seat for somebody, and I guess was read the riot act and said under no circumstances, because of all this heat we're getting. So sometimes you just put a light on something and people stop doing it. But it's still a problem, like I said. And to her credit, Lorena Garcia is a close friend of mine. She's real ultra progressive, but she got her seat by a vacancy appointment, and she wants to try and reform the system too, because she even said, it felt like more of a coronation than an election. So, and then this one I'm also pretty proud about, because as you all probably know, we had 4 shots at property tax reform, and I knew property taxes was probably the most important issue in my district. When I got elected, showed up. They put me on the finance committee. I was like, what are we doing about property taxes? And they said, leave it alone. The governor's got it. I'm like, well, I'm on the finance committee. I'll write, a bill. We can take care of it. So, no, the governor's got it. Don't touch it. Don't say anything. So, all right. Well, 2 months in, still hadn't heard anything. And so then Lisa Frizzell down in Castle Rock, a Republican, she brought a bill, and it was pretty generic, but I was like, well, a good plan now is better than, perfect plan later. And I don't see anything else out there. So I broke ranks and voted for it. It got defeated 6-5 in the finance committee. Took a lot of heat for it, but I'm like, I don't see anything else. And then, as some of you know, the governor dropped that 120-page SB 23303, which was Prop HH on us with like 4 days at the end. Basically slammed it through. The Republicans walked out the last day on it, all of them. So it got 39 votes to get through. I was one of only 7 Democrats to vote against it, but then it went down in flames by 20 points at the ballot box. So we came back in special session. They set up property tax commission to look at possible changes. And 2 of the people on the commission were Frizzell and Rep. Kennedy, who I'm both very close to. I sit next to Kennedy in the finance committee. And so they were giving me feedback, and it was like they were spinning their wheels. They were telling me, hey, this is going on. I don't even know if we're going to get anything done. Yeah, nothing's happening. And then the Friday, I could find the exact date pretty easily, but I don't remember off the top of my head right now. There was a Friday before the last day anyone could submit a resolution. The president of the Senate, Fenberg, was in the media saying, we don't need to do anything about property taxes. It's a local tax issue. The state doesn't get any money. We probably ought to just leave it alone. And I read that and I'm like, okay, but you told everyone we were going to do something. So I called the bill drafters on Sunday and said, write this thing up for me. And on Monday introduced a resolution that was a very generic, it was kind of like Tabor Light, where it just cap property tax revenue going to whatever entity it was to inflation, but 2%, inflation plus 2%, unless it's overridden by whatever body was responsible for it. They could override that, but they'd have to take an affirmative action to override it. And you just don't get this massive property tax revenue just because everybody's values went up. The Colorado Association of Realtors lobbyists called me the next day and said, oh my God, this is a serious proposal. I'm like, well, what, do you think I'm just throwing stuff against the wall? So they held it for several days and didn't want me to introduce it and kept holding it. And the speaker has the authority to hold it for 3 days. And I was finally like, no, ma'am, introduce it. And to the shock of everyone, it got out of the finance committee 6-5. All the Republicans voted for it. And one of my closest progressive colleagues who trust me voted for it. And I guess this is recorded, but I've said it before. So if you actually listen to the committee hearing right at the end before they cut it off, you can hear the chair of the finance committee telling my progressive colleague, you're going to have to answer to the speaker for that vote. And she said, well, why? And then it gets cut off. But it got out there. Yeah. And so now they had a viable tax reform proposal. So all of a sudden, all sorts of stuff we wound up doing it. And I don't think no one will ever admit it. Maybe I'm wrong, but I pretty much in my heart of hearts know that the fact that I got that thing out is what spurred everyone to do the property tax stuff that they did do. Because again, it was sounding like they weren't going to do anything. Next slide. For 2025, when I get reelected, my top 3 priorities that are in my heart of hearts is public safety, public education, and environment. But you get down there and you have to specialize. And there are already people very specialized. Judy Amable, the public safety aspect, the biggest part to me is the mental health component. Because in the 60s, Colorado had 2,000 mental health beds. Today, we have 4 times the population and we have 200. And you talk to the old cops and they're like, in the late 70s, early 80s, I picked up someone with mental health problems. I'd check them into the hospital. Now I have to book them. And guess what? They ain't making bail. So we have made law enforcement the default mental health providers for everybody over 18. And the cops will tell you right now in the Douglas County Jail, I think the number is like 63% of everyone down there is on psychotropic drugs. Wow. They're the ones taking care of these people. They're out on the streets or they're in the jails. So, and we're making the schools, people are trying to make the schools the default mental health providers for everyone under 18. Neither one of those institutions, that's their job. And we need to bring back our mental health institutions. The problem is, it would cost a lot of money. And so it's kind of, and Judy Amable, whose son is schizophrenic, she is the point person in the legislature on all mental health issues. So I kind of have to work with her, but I have to defer to her on everything because she is the expert and it's her ball of wax. And public education is kind of the same thing too. There's so many teachers and education people down there. The education committee is totally dominated by them. And I even asked for a seat on it. And the chair was real good about it. She's like, oh man, you'd be great because you come with a genuine interest and you're not from the education community. You might give a different view, but they still loaded it up with all education people. And then the environment I'm real big on. If you see my website, I grew up in Colorado in the 70s and lived up in Evergreen. Once a month, maybe we'd have to go to Denver and I'd drive down I-70. And that's when there was no traffic on I-70 back then. You drive down and and see the brown cloud hanging over Denver. And you get down in there and, you know, 7, 8, 9 years old, and it's like, you'd experience chewy air. It's like,
Yeah.
get back up to Evergreen. It's like, yeah, that's not normal or right. They got it done, but now, even if we've halved the emissions per person, we've doubled the population. We're getting back to those same days with the ozone and everything. So I'm a big environmentalist, and I don't fight over people on climate change or is it man-made. You know, I tell my conservative constituents and stuff, I'm like, I don't know why we're even having this argument. We know what's coming out of the tailpipes. It's not good for us. And if you don't believe me, seal up your garage, get in your truck and run it for you. and see what happens. So I'm like, if we can reduce the emissions and not destroy the economy, we should take every chance we can to do it. Why would we not? And they're usually pretty good about that. Like, yeah, okay, I get that. And so I'm like, yeah, we don't have to argue climate change. You know, we know it's a problem. If we can reduce it, why wouldn't we? But you get down there, like I said, you get, you know, areas of expertise. And these have actually, most people have 1 or 2. I wound up with 3. So I've become the good governance guy, and that wasn't my ambition or dream, because it's not a fun place to be, actually, because it doesn't matter who's in power. They don't like good governance. No one likes to see their power, right? No one, yeah, it doesn't matter who, they don't want to see their power diluted or restricted because they think they're doing the right thing and they don't want any obstacles in the to get stuff done. So I got down there and started seeing things. You know, I made my reputation in Douglas County holding the local powers accountable, and they were all Republicans. So, you know, I even had the Republicans yell and scream at me and say, "You're just doing this to us because we're Republicans." I would tell them, no, my own party was doing the same thing. I would hold them accountable too. Well, like I said, those are glass houses. Get down in the Capitol, and it's like, oh my God. Yeah, and I don't blame my leadership at all, because they inherited that swamp. So it got kind of a bit nasty because leadership was very angry with me. You know, feel like I'm a traitor and everything, and didn't want to help me get reelected or anything. But yeah, I tried to smooth it over and said, look, it was never personal, because you didn't create the swamp, you just inherited it. And I get that. You know, so I tried to fix it, but it had to go public with a few things, which of course
You called them out for secret meetings,
yeah, well, and I joked,
for not open meeting.
yeah, we
compliance.
were blatantly violating the open meeting laws. And like I said, I made my name here on open meeting. So it's like the hypocrisy was pretty bad. And now I joke too, because of course we got the injunction on them. And then the first thing we did when we came back the next session was basically exempt the entire legislature, which was a good point for me to tell my colleagues who were angry at me saying, well, leadership was fixing it. You didn't have to sue. They were never going to comply. We wound up just gutting the whole thing anyway. And so a lot of people are like, oh, great, Bob, you basically destroyed your political career and you gained nothing. I was like, no, we actually gained something, because now rather than having secret illegal meetings, we just have secret meetings. and that is an improvement, because it was the hypocrisy of, you know, the hypocrisy of making laws and expecting other people to follow them. And we're not following a law that the voters put on us in 74 by a 20-point margin. You know, we got rid of that at least. So it is what it is. But I, you know, again, I do think that was an improvement. Yeah, because there was actually a lot of colleagues of mine too. They're like, yeah, I knew it was wrong, but you know, they'd always been doing it. And I don't fault anyone down there either, because if I hadn't been doing all my sunshine law work here and I just showed up there, like, oh, this is the way it's always been done, I'd be like, oh, okay. Even though we just had a class that said we shouldn't do that. But, well, and I be careful talking too much out of school, but that as another example of why it was kind of irritating to me is, you know, we get these legislative aides, they're all these young whippersnappers coming out of school, we're going to change the world, idealistic. And my own aide, they go to aide class or aide school, and they tell them about the sunshine laws, and this is legal, this is illegal. And then the very next day, we have the heads of the caucuses telling them, keep those meetings off your legislators' calendar, or disguise them, call them something else, basically lie on. Yeah. And you know, so I have my aide doing that, or saying, is this right? I'm like, no. And you know, and they have this young person looking at me and say, well, what are you going to do about it? It's not right. And I didn't realize CPR was recording me. I should, you know, it's public radio. So I thought it was a print thing. So I actually got recorded. They put it on one of their things. I said, you know, what was the exact quote? It was basically something along the lines of, I don't mind destroying the idealism of young people, but you need to do it over time, not the first day they show up. No. So these are the kind of the bills I'm looking at. And I've had a lot of people say, where are you going to run next time? I'm like, I got to get reelected first. So this is kind of the stuff I've been looking at doing. Legislative oversight. we do not have any power of investigative powers like Congress does or the executive in the state. We don't have subpoena authority. We don't have the ability to put anyone under oath for testimony. So we have to just sit there and accept whatever the governor's office tells us. And it may not be a problem now. Yeah, and they don't even have to give us anything if they don't want to. But I'm like, we probably don't want to wait till it is a problem before, because then it's probably some partisan thing. And then, we know it's something is the right thing to do. We ought to try and put that in. And my colleague Lorena Garcia, she was also someone who saw this independently. And so hopefully maybe we work on it together. She tried to bring something forward, but they killed it. And we're going to need a huge consensus because it'll probably, I don't care if the governor is Republican or Democrat, they're going to veto this, because they protect their own power. But I think both sides realize it's, especially after the last special session we had a standing ovation from all the Republicans and all the Democrats for one of our colleagues, Rep. Bacon, who gave a very strong speech of, we don't work for the second floor. We don't work for the government, called us back in and basically gave us something and said, you will pass this. So I think there may be appetite, on both sides of the aisle to make some reforms. Hatch Act law enforcement, I ran something like that first session, and it was overly ambitious. You're a brand new legislature, of course you get overly ambitious, and then reality hits you. So the bill was originally basically 3 tied in 1, where it's going to have the DAs and sheriffs. Oh shit, we are 11:05. 5 more minutes. We're going to have the DAs and sheriffs elected in nonpartisan offices, have law enforcement required to import the DOD regulation on extremism in the ranks into their policies, and then apply the Hatch Act, which is nonpartisan work, into law enforcement. It got watered down immediately. My own party went ballistic on the nonpartisan election, so I had to throw that part. And then the DOD regulation on extremism, I'm still a big believer on it, but a lot of people didn't understand, I think. They're like, First Amendment issues, I was like, the DOD's been doing this for 40 years. We're okay with it, but I left that aside. So it got watered down to be just basically a prohibition on law enforcement engaging in partisan political activity while in uniform or using government property. And if you come out of the military, it's like, well, yeah, that's an easy one. And the sheriffs actually were neutral on it until they found out it was going to apply to them. Right. And then everything just blew up. So I got it out of the House, and it was the closest vote until the last week where we had this gambling bill, which was another interesting story I don't have time to tell. But it was a 34-31 vote on the floor, and I had people flipping on me that morning, and it was the sheriffs were calling their legislators personally saying, vote against it, all sorts of stuff going on. But I got it out of the House. But then when it got to the Senate, they watered it down so much that it was basically going to be the sheriff would decide, do a report on himself and write it up and decide if he did anything wrong. And the funny part is Nebraska has this law and they enforce it. They actually took some people in the last election. They fined like 5 sheriffs for appearing in partisan political ads in uniform. And I have a buddy, I haven't traced it down yet, from Oklahoma, who's a lawyer and a school board president. And he said, I'm pretty sure we have that here too, because I have never seen an Oklahoma sheriff campaign in uniform. He's always working on the farm or working on the tractor. He said, never in uniform. So again, I think it's an important thing to do, but it's also my own party sheriffs don't like it. Property taxes being curbed. That's another Lorena Garcia. She's a real left-wing person, but she comes up with some really neat ideas sometimes. So we're putting that property tax exemption of like 200 on the first $200,000 of value, but that goes across the whole state. So down in the San Luis Valley, 200,000 might cover your whole freaking property. Here in Highlands Ranch, it may be about a third, maybe 25%. So she wanted to make it county by county, and it would be curved based on the 70% median of whatever's there. And I'm like, that's actually a pretty good idea. But the treasurers went ballistic. They're like, this is going to be too hard to do. And I'm like, I think an Apple IIe probably could do this, but it's something I think we ought to look at because it actually would help the majority of my constituents, because everyone would get the same exemption. So a lot of people were screaming, "Oh, you're just going after the rich." Because unfortunately, my colleague Garcia, she uses a lot of class warfare rhetoric. So it puts off a lot of people that may actually be sympathetic to her ideas. But when she's constantly talking about how the rich are screwing everyone and we got to screw them back and that kind of stuff, it's like, yeah, that's not very helpful. The county commissioners bill, a lot of you may have heard about that. That's another one that's very touchy. That's right now in Colorado, we have many large counties, Douglas being one of them, where 3 county commissioners are elected at large, which means 2, not 1, 2 people can control the entire county and everything does it. County commissioners in Colorado are the most powerful position out there because there's no checks and balances on it. The governor can't do anything he wants, but you get 2 people who have the same constituents, so they don't even have to worry about having differing interests. And, they can basically control the county. And the issue popped up here for me in Douglas County. Some people know the obvious ones, but it was also because I represent Highlands Ranch. Highlands Ranch and Lone Tree together make up 28% of the population of Douglas County. We are a suburb of Denver. There is no question we're a suburb of Denver. The 0 Broadway line ends in Town Center. Lone Tree has the end of the light rail. The rest of the county doesn't want to be a suburb of Denver, and I respect that, but we have no say in our county government. So like when they blew up Tri-County Health Department, I can guarantee it was less popular in Highlands Ranch than it was in the rest of the county. But Laura Thomas may be from our area, but she represents everyone in this county. So she's following what everyone in the county wants rather than, the people in Highlands Ranch. So I started looking at it closer. It turns out it's an issue in many counties. Boulder's like that, Jefferson County, Larimer, Adams has 5, but they're all elected at large. And these at-large local elections have a notorious history. They're used to keep down a political minority. It doesn't matter who the political minority is. Unfortunately, in most of American history, it was a racial political minority. So you'd have all these local school boards and counties in the South where 65% white, 35% black. And, and I get the pushback now, local control. People should be able to decide if they want, district representation. It's like, well, yeah, in all those elections, it was like, who wants to change? 65% say, everything's wonderful. 35% say, no, this sucks. And you lost again. So in the 80s, the DOJ basically wiped these things out through the entire country. Colorado flew under the radar because we did not have a discrete racial minority that was being locked out of the local government during that time frame. So when I talked to voting rights experts on the East Coast, they were actually shocked we still had these. They're like, oh my God, I thought Colorado was on the cutting edge of voting rights and everything. And you got these at-large local elections? I'm like, yeah, are they a problem? I'm like, yeah, I think so. So I tried to expand it to 5. If your county had more than 250,000 people, you'd have 5 commissioners and the majority had to be elected by district. Got killed by the Democratic commissioners. They were, ones who hated it. The Republicans, I was accused of trying to get a Democratic commissioner elected out of Highlands Ranch. And I joke and say, well, I'm excited you all think I was able to turn Highlands Ranch blue all by myself. But the point is, there's certain interests in a moderate Republican that looks after Highlands Ranch's interests good in the county. The Boulder County GOP was excited about it because they feel locked out. There's conservative areas in the east of Boulder County. And they're like, yeah, our person lives here, but they answered all the people in Boulder, the city of Boulder. So I actually had the Democratic rep in Boulder County, in the eastern part, and the Democratic rep in the western part of Jefferson County, in the mountains, and they feel locked out. I'll vote for it, but it still got killed. But I still want to try and do something. Teacher tax credit, I think I've talked about that. And then good governance, I probably will get tapped for stuff like that. I always wind up with a veterans bill. I might talk about Amendment G real quick if we have time. And then the Department of Revenue often brings me a bill every once in a while because they think I know what I'm talking about. I took out the interim. Oh, well. Well, these are the 3 takeaways. And Bill Search, read the fiscal note, ID yourself as Highlands Ranch. And I guess the last 2 little plugs would be, I did go to the Democratic National Convention as I was a Biden delegate and then Kamala delegate, one of the first people to put it in. Went to that. That's real helpful as a representative because you get to know the bigwigs and get some extra help for your district. It's not just a partisan thing to do those things. I was selected by the National Conference of State Legislatures to come out there and give a presentation and be one of only 4 panelists. The other 3 were the chairs of their respective finance committees, but that's just to give an idea that, I have a pretty good reputation in the tax field. And it wasn't something I wanted to continue with, but because I have a background in it. And it was kind of interesting being there too. So it was all the state legislatures, all the state experts on taxes. And one of the finance chairs was, we have term limits in Colorado. She'd been in the legislature for 44 years, I think. So, yeah. Well, that's it. Amendment G, vote for it. That was my baby, totally my baby. And I'm really proud of it because in hindsight, I didn't think it was that big a deal. But when I saw how hard it is to actually get a constitutional amendment on the ballot and get through, usually you need a ton of money and a ton of people behind it. And this one was just, when I started talking to people and they're like, well, this is going to require a constitutional amendment, the bill drafters, I'm like, okay, fine, how do we do that? Let's do it. So it's on the ballot. So, okay. Helps disabled veterans that got left out of the disabled veterans homestead exemption because of a definition. They screwed up the definition, so it left out a small group that should never have been left out. And I'm really big about that fairness issue where if you're gonna, I'm notorious, I'm probably one of the most fiscally conservative guys on the finance committee because, the Republicans will sit there and vote for stuff they like for their people all the time too. I'm kind of like Dr. No special privileges for anyone. But if you give out a special carve out, everyone who should belong in there needs to get in there, and I'll always fight for that. So the questions, we got 20 minutes. That's good.
My immediate question, Bob, is you are doing so many things. Does the average new legislator come in and do as many bills and topics as you do, or do they learn a little longer? You seem very active to me as a new legislator.
Actually, that may not, it's a little difficult question to answer because I was totally from outside the system. And I was surprised when I got down there. Most of my new colleagues, they've been around the block for a long time. They've been union organizers. They've been running nonprofits. They've been running bills for years. And I showed up, I had no, because we even had a recount and everything. So, I had like a month to figure everything out. The bill drafters were actually excited though that I gave all my bills to them right up front because most people, they're like, oh my God, you actually are asking for them early. So it's a little different. The one thing, I want to be careful about talking out of school because it's just how it works.
Sure.
A lot of legislators are given bills by special interest groups to run.
Yeah.
And they're not their own bills really, but they're allied with that group and they run it. And it was kind of embarrassing because CPR is probably the best reporters down there. And we had a big talk people could go to on, how you deal with the press, and they gave their feedback. And so, how do you get your get some good press on your bills and stuff? And the lead reporter, and it was kind of embarrassing. He was like, well, if you want to, come talk to us about your bill, it'd be good if you actually know what's in it. And I had a colleague of mine, and I did not know how this worked. I'm never going to disown her. She's one of my closest friends and colleagues. This is Elizabeth X. She had her negative points and her good points, but I, got along with her great because she was just a tough, smart lady and very honest. But she pointed out she was just a workaholic. She had this huge Excel spreadsheet with everybody's bills and where the power centers were coming from. It was insane. But she was just one of these people.
Spreadsheet.
Well, and she came to me and said, Bob, you and I are the only two that the bills we're bringing are our bills. Everybody else is running bills for other people.
Interesting.
So I did not actually run as many bills as some of my colleagues.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like I'm way ahead, but
People don't know how it works, how busy you are.
yeah, but I had one colleague who brought 24 bills and got permission, but she had like 3 aides and it was just bringing in stuff from the special interest groups and just running it. And yeah, because we run maybe 700 bills and maybe 500 get through.
Wow.
A lot of them are just adjusting previous laws.
Bob Eilert first and then Frank.
I would like you to compare the two jobs. Being in the Marine Corps and being a politician.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, it depends what type, because when you're in the Marine Corps and you move up into the senior ranks, it becomes very similar. Eisenhower had a real famous comment. Someone was asking him, well, you're running for president. You've never been in politics. And he just laughed. And he was like, I was at the Pentagon since the 1930s. I know all about politics.
He said about Eisenhower, was gonna wonder what to do when he gave people orders and they didn't follow them.
Yeah,
And he'd been in that
yeah,
situation forever.
Yeah.
I don't think Montgomery ever paid attention to Eisenhower.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, I know what your question is, but even another, the head of, I'm getting so old, but the head of who was the Secretary of War for Roosevelt was talking to George C. Marshall, and Marshall was going against Roosevelt on something, and actually, he would always like beat him down when he thought it was something stupid. And the Secretary of War said, Roosevelt says you're the best politician in in Washington. And he got all mad. I said, I'm not a politician. He just started laughing at him. So when you're running circles around Roosevelt, you're the best politician in DC. So again, at the higher ranks, I said, it's probably a lot because you have to negotiate with people. You know, a lot of Marines who even move up the higher ranks, they have fond memories of being young and running around with the guys. And the only thing you have to worry about is killed or be killed. And, you know, that's a bad thing to be at, but life is simpler. And you can trust the guy to your left or right all the time. People flip on each other down there well, that's one reason I have very good relationships with the progressives. Some people are shocked. I'm still shocked by it, but they've told me, they're like, Bob, you never lie to us. You always tell us where you're coming, what you're thinking, and you have a good reason for why you may vote against one of our bills. And I'm like, well, isn't everyone like that? I'm like, no. I said, most of the moderate, they're doing just what their paymasters tell them, and they'll disappear on the day of a vote, or they'll vote. Said, you always stick to your word, or you tell us why you can't do it, or if you change it, will you explain why you're doing that? So, yeah.
Frank,
You mentioned, I think, proportional representation with regards to county commissioners. Is that what I was hearing?
Well, district was what I was, and I actually,
But I'm specifically wondering, will you suspect somebody this coming legislative season will put in a bill for proportional representation being enabled by both the Secretary of State, and perhaps with that bill including something such as approval voting?
you mean on the state legislative side or?
Agenda, but the legislature passing a bill to have the Secretary of State write up the enabling rules and regulations, I should say.
Well, I mean, we're waiting on, we'll have to see what the outcome is on that amendment first are you talking about the ranked choice voting and jungle primaries?
Well, yes, we'll have to hold on that, but regardless, there's other offices that it might be applicable, proportional representation in.
Yeah,
Voting might be.
yeah, yeah, I don't think so. I'm just thinking, because, I brought that county commissioner bill, any change to the power structure, and again, it doesn't matter who's in power, any change to the power structures is a threat to the people in power. So those kind of reforms are always very, very difficult. As my county commissioner bill, I want to be careful what I say. I didn't have a single colleague tell me it was the wrong thing. A lot of people told me, Bob, you're absolutely right. I can't take the political heat. I just can't do it. And, so it is what it is. And I even had just as another aside, like the sheriff bill for law enforcement one, I had a GOP colleague I was very close to, and I was trying to get some votes on that side of the aisle. And I tell them, some of them have been in the military. I'm like, this is the right thing. Partisan political activity in your uniform or using government property. And they're like, Bob, you're absolutely right. But we are very close on this side of the aisle with law enforcement. We will not cross them on anything. But we have, on our side, we're very close to the teachers' unions, and a lot of people won't cross the teachers' unions. So, people have interests. I don't get too upset about that. People are like, oh, the lobbyists and special interests. It's like, well, they're representing the interests of real people. So, that can't be down there on their own. So, it is what it is. You just have to work in that world and not, complain about that world. It is, yeah. Yeah, but because of that, I don't think anyone would, when I ran my county commissioner bill as an example, I had the League of Women Voters head in Boulder, who's a big proponent of that ranked choice voting. She came and she was just nonstop on me, wanting me to put ranked choice voting in the county commissioner bill, or just the option to have it. And she's like, well, we won't back unless you put it in there. And I just kept telling her, look, I'm not going to get district voting. How the hell do you think I'm going to get ranked choice voting? Well, and she gave me like a 3-page pamphlet to explain it. I'm like, I get it, but if you have to give a 3-page pamphlet to people to explain how they're going to vote, that's probably a problem. So if they were going to do it, I would say you really do need to start on the local level and let people get used to it before jumping whole hog into the governor. Everybody gets selected by ranked choice voting, and people show up and are like, what the hell is this? And they just start marking. Yeah.
Too confusing.
Yeah.
We've got about 10 minutes left. I want to give our Zoom participants a chance to jump in here if they have a question or comment. Anybody on Zoom? Okay, going once, going twice. All righty.
Oh, I wanted to avoid politics, but we got the election coming up, if you want to.
Yes.
Local stuff or
I actually,
the money is kind of interesting in my race. Because I'm new to the system, so it was an eye opener. Because in 22 when I ran, nobody thought I could win at all. So I got like no help whatsoever from our own side. And I found out later, I found out later they were even blocking people who wanted to help me because there were people like, oh, this is exciting. This guy might win. They're like, don't spend $1 in Douglas County. The Democrat can never win in Douglas County. Don't spend $1. But I'm not really bitter about it because the Republicans didn't think I could win either. So I didn't have to face hundreds of thousands of dollars from their independent committees. So it was basically mano a mano, me against my opponent, and he outspent me 165 to 125,000. I was the only legislator to win their seat who got outspent. But obviously I won, and I was the marginal seat to win. So now I think there's been $500,000 total with everyone that's spent in the district so far between me, my opponent, and all the independent committees. And that was Monday with 3 weeks to go.
Wow.
wow.
And it was 200,000 that the independent committees on the Republican side had already dropped on me, about 90% negative advertising.
Right.
And my side backed me up with 130,000, which is good because there was a lot of rumors going around that I had ticked off so many people in the party. My own party was going to throw me to the wolves. But they have not. There's still a lot of people in the party who won't back me, but I developed a pretty good relationship with the unions because even though I can't support 100% of everything they do, the mere fact that I don't think they're evil makes me the most pro-union. The most pro-union guy, elected official in all of Douglas County. And they're very pragmatic. Most of the special interest groups, unfortunately, on both sides, are very purist. And if you're not 100% with us on every issue, you're against us and they won't back you. So I've had, so it's been hard for me in many ways because I think I'm the only Democrat in the state who did not get endorsed by Planned Parenthood. And that's not because I made a commitment when I ran that I would not support any further expansions of abortion rights, but I would fight any rollback. And Colorado already had some of the most liberal abortion laws in the country. And when my opponent wanted to ban abortion from the moment of conception, I looked pretty good. But then I get down there and when they want to do more and more, I'm like, I can't be there with you. Not that I'm going to oppose it, but I'm not there with you. And like, oh, well, you're not with us, you're against us. So, and there's many organizations like that. So this time, yeah, there's a lot of money floating around out there. It's kind of funny too, because you sit there in the middle and you got all these big money people, people with hundreds of thousands saying, oh, he's so wonderful, and hundreds of thousands saying, oh, he's, evil incarnate, so, yeah. And some of them are funny. I don't know if you all saw the one with me looking like a monster over and looking into the schoolyard. That one I found amusing, but.
More questions, comments?
This may not be your area. I know in the last session, there were several gun control laws passed. What is your position? Are you interested in expanding any more laws involving gun violence and
Yeah.
things like that?
That's a real touchy one for me, because it's like the abortion issue and the guns issue, because I had been a Republican for 30 plus years and I'm affiliated for 4. When the Democrats came and asked me to run, they wanted to know my positions on those two issues because they're they're core issues on both sides that are very difficult. And I told them, no matter what my personal opinions are, as the representative for Highlands Ranch, for the gun thing, I just told you, for the abortion, I wouldn't support any further expansions, but I would fight like hell any rollback of what we currently have. And then on the firearms issue, it was kind of the same thing. I said I would fight any rollback of current gun laws, but I would not support further restrictions on individual gun rights. So when I got, and that was another one where my opponent was a gun dealer who wanted to get rid of every gun law in the state, literally every gun law in the state. So I looked pretty good. Colorado Cease Fire actually endorsed me. But then I get down there, and of course, we have colleagues that want to do all sorts of stuff. So it depends on the issue. If it falls outside that commitment, like the gun law manufacturers, I voted for that because back in like 2000, when the Republicans controlled everything, they basically put a industry immunity in place. And I'm a big believer in, you don't get special carve outs. So we basically restored them to being like any other industry and they can get sued. So I voted for that because that wasn't like an individual gun right thing. I voted for an expansion of the red flag laws. I voted for the ghost guns, getting rid of the ghost guns things. The thing that got me a lot of heat and notoriety was, the assault weapons ban bill, so-called assault weapons ban bill, died in the Judiciary Committee 7-6, and I was one of the no votes, and there was a lot of machinations going on there. And that's where one thing that I became very good friends with Epps, because it was her bill, and it really actually wasn't her bill. She got on it, it was the majority, the whip's bill, and leadership, to be quite honest, didn't want it to see the light of day. So they put all sorts of heat and got the guy to get off it. And Epps was left with it, and it wasn't even her original thing, but she was like, we campaigned saying we would bring this. I'm going to bring it. So all by herself, she was running that with no support, and we wound up having like a 14-hour hearing on it. Hundreds of people out there, all by herself sitting there. I just have so much respect for her because, and I was the killing vote. And of course I had tons of people across the state irate at me. Yeah, it was a pretty weak bill though, because all it did was try and ban the sale or transfer in the state, but you can still go any state around us and bring in 20 AR-15s if you want. So, an assault weapons ban really has to come at the national level because you got leakage all over. It doesn't really affect everything. And to leadership's credit, they were traumatized. I don't know if you all remember this, but when they just put in that magazine capacity restriction like a decade ago, that 15 rounds, you couldn't have any rounds, so most magazines are 30 rounds, and they just did the magazine restriction. They had 3 state senators recalled, not just not reelected. 2 of them got completely recalled and Democratic senators thrown out, and they lost control of the Senate. And one, to her credit, gave up her seat so they could appoint someone else in the seat because she was going to go down because they all voted for it, flipped the entire Senate. And so then anything else that they ever wanted to do by the Democrats was gone for that next until they could get the Senate back. So they have a lot of that institutional trauma. A lot of the new young people that are coming in don't remember that or anything. So they're all gung-ho on doing a lot of gun bills. But, the older leadership, I think, is just very wary about it because, I think Colorado's changed enough. They could be a little more aggressive. But, so that's my commitment. And that's where I was. But Epps was fantastic because I had so many people angry with me. And then the Windcrest Democrats were some of my best supporters, wanted me to have a forum with them to explain the vote. Just about that. And I went there and it was like 100. They said, well, see if Epps would come. And I didn't even get to ask her. I said, hey, there's a Windcrest gun forum. I said, oh, can I come? So she came on down and she was fantastic. She just looked at everyone and said, I don't know why you blame Bob. He never said he was going to vote for this. The people you got to blame are all the ones who said they would vote for it and support me and couldn't be found anywhere when it came time. And then she was like, there's less than 5 people down there in the Capitol I trust. And one of them is sitting right here. So,
Very good.
so that was kind of but that's my background. So it depends on the bill, because again, I don't think I would have won because I had a lot of Republican gun owners tell me, you were the first Democrat I ever voted for, and it's because I trust you on the gun issue. And I've been surprised because a lot of my 2A supporter constituents, they're reasonable people, most of them. They don't have any problem, like the 3-day waiting period was a hard vote for me. And they were, they're like 3 days, I mean, and the red flag law, most of the reasonable gun owners don't have a problem with that. They have a problem you taking their guns. But I think people understand, the gun owners, a firearm is the ability to take someone else's life. And they know that. That is massive power. So they don't have a problem with background checks, red flag laws, a 3-day waiting period. They do not want to give up that power, though, that they have. They have that power to protect themselves. So
We've got just a couple minutes left. Bob, make a prediction for us for the presidential. Trump or Harris, and will we know on November 5, or will this drag out for a while?
I'm a Harris delegate, so she's winning. That's all. Yeah. But it's going to come down, the one, and I talked with Steve earlier was, despite all the machinations, I was saying this a year ago, and it's still true. It's probably going to come down to the rural counties in Pennsylvania, whether the Democrats lose those 80-20 or they lose them 60-40. So I was hoping Shapiro would be he had problems with the teachers unions and problems with the Israeli issue just because he was Jewish, even though he's
The Pennsylvania governor as being the vice president nominee.
Because it's like, as long as he could bring Pennsylvania, who cared? But the reason I was telling Steve too, I'm convinced the reason that they pushed Biden aside and got Kamala in there was not so as much as the presidency. It was because they were really worried about all the down party stuff or down ballot. And if once the senators were worried about their own seats, it was time to act.
Yeah.
But even if she loses, she has done incredible help because she's energized so many people. There's probably a lot of Senate seats and congressional seats that will be saved just because of what she did in terms of energizing everyone in other states. But it's still coming down to
Yeah.
basically being as close as 2020 and probably coming down to those Pennsylvania counties. In fact, when Hillary Clinton lost, I was still a Republican, but Obama was irate with Hillary Clinton because he would tell people, he's like, because she wouldn't campaign out in those rural areas and everything. And he's like, I went out there all the time and I was never going to win them, but I never lost them 80-20. I only lost them 60-40 because I was out there talking to the people. And even her husband, my understanding was Bill Clinton was yelling at her campaign team 3 days before the election, 3 or 4, you need to get her up into Wisconsin. And they're like, we're going to win Wisconsin. It's like, no matter what anyone may think of Bill Clinton, he was one of the most gifted political types and just attuned to politics. So,
Yes.
all right, well, I'll be around if you want to talk.
We're out of time.
I appreciate it.
Question of, how many have already voted, just out of curiosity?
Early.
How many have already voted?
We'll take you off my
Is it
phone.
my mail? Curious.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Next week.
Bye.
Bye, Susan.
Okay.